Okay, hello everyone. I'm Lisa Lafferty. I work at the Center for Social Research and Health, one of the seminar series committee members. So just before we get started, I'll just ask that everyone put their mics on mute. You can turn them back on later during the Q&A, and you can pop in any questions in the chat during the seminar as well as at the end during the Q&A. And just to note that the session is recorded. So please be mindful of anything that you put into the chat or anything that you might be sending to a friend that you think is private and perhaps isn't. And so I'd like to welcome everyone here today to the CSRH seminar series. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are conducting this seminar on the unceded lands of the Bidjigal people, lands on which the UNSW Kensington campus stands and where I'm actually working from today. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present here today. You may also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land you are currently on, given you may be located elsewhere. I invite you to feel free to pop that into the chat. So today we have Dr. Simon Clay, an early career researcher at the National Drug and Alcohol Research Center. Simon's work focuses on the relationship between drug use and expressions of well-being. His work extends into mental health and substance dependency, drug trends within minority communities, definitions of health, and examining how community organizations enact public health policy. In today's presentation, Simon will explore the ethical quandaries of qualitative research, unpacking the question, what does it mean to be told a secret by a semi-stranger? Simon will discuss the ethical issues that surround participants disclosing secrets to a researcher during an interview and the way we as researchers are taught tactics to elicit this sensitive information, which can leave the participant and/or the researcher emotionally shaken. This seminar aims to provoke and upset what is considered to be ethical conduct in a research setting. I'm very excited to have Simon here with us today. Simon, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure. Today I want to talk about secrets. So qualitative research is built upon secrets. As researchers, we are sworn to keep participants' identities secret and protect their data from unauthorized eyes. Covert or undercover ethnography, while being an ethically contentious approach, is viewed by some as a valuable form of data collection and has been cited as a creative way of gaining insight into hard-to-access groups. A large portion of qualitative research is also dedicated to exposing society's dirty secrets, that is, the systems of violence and ostracization that disproportionately affect groups like people of color, those living with disability or mental illness, people who use drugs, and queer folk. Qualitative research is messy work. It explores the human condition and attempts to create an aperture into the life of others so we may better understand the complexity of social reality. And interviews are one of the main ways that this is done. But what are the limits to asking someone to share their reality with a stranger? What are the ethical implications of a participant disclosing information they've never told anyone else before? Drawing from my own experiences in the field, today, I want to explore the ethics of participant disclosure, how emotion and trauma complicate these ethics, institution, researcher, participant power relations, duties of care, and the implications that all of these have for researchers in the field. I've never told anyone that before. In my time as a qualitative researcher, a number of my interview participants have uttered this phrase, and I've often been left wondering what to make of it. How should I respond? Is there a right response? In many instances, it is said with a sigh of catharsis. They felt comfortable disclosing a secret to a relatively neutral party, knowing that it will go no further. The researcher becomes a vehicle, an emotional scapegoat for the participant to offload and unpack complicated feelings and difficult experiences. They are someone to bear witness to the pain or heartache the participant has endured, someone to listen and acknowledge the trauma they experienced. Disclosing secrets can also be a way for participants from a marginalized group to care for others who are experiencing similar hardship by bringing awareness to the unique issues that this group face. Catherine Becker-Blees and Jennifer Freyd argued that it could be counterproductive and even harmful to participants to avoid asking about traumatic or difficult experiences, such as with child abuse or sexual violence, because this avoidance can reify the stigma associated with these issues, further entrench societal silence, and allow the researcher and participant to collaboratively deny what the participant has experienced. To be complicit in keeping a participant's secrets hidden can ultimately hinder the transformative potential of research. Having a participant disclose a secret can place the researcher in a difficult position, however. Being told you are privy to a veiled piece of information adds a great deal of weight to that piece of information. It also raises a host of questions. Why haven't they felt comfortable sharing this information with someone else? If they have told someone else, who was it and why them? How long have they held on to this secret? Furthermore, spilled secrets can radically change the tone and meaning of an entire interview. Certain phrases carry a new significance. Moments of discomfort or silence are now illuminated. The reason why the participant decided to share their story with you becomes slightly clearer. Researchers are the arbiters of what data is worthy of inclusion in a publication based on the research question and topic. In the words of Janice Morse, all data are not equal. We move through transcripts, break them down into core themes and ideas in order to create a distillation of novel findings that enhance our understanding of the world. In this way, certain parts of an interview become more valuable than other parts. Some researchers use methodologies that include the participant in the data analysis and writing up process, such as participatory action research, interviewee transcript review, and member checking. This engenders the participant with greater agency over how they are represented in publications and the way their words and experiences have been interpreted by researchers. These methodologies also work to reduce the power imbalance between researcher and participant and enable a deeper reading of the data. However, these are far from common practice. Being told by a participant that this piece of information is special has implications for the data analysis process too. Social reality and the way participants find meaning in the world are co-created between researcher and participant during an interview. And researchers have an ethical duty to try and represent this reality as clearly and honestly as possible. So to deliberately exclude information the participant has highlighted as important can therefore be seen as a failure to meet this responsibility. However, what if the participant holds discriminatory or openly stigmatizing views? While the researcher has a responsibility to give an accurate representation of the participant, to include explicitly racist or homophobic remarks does not portray the participant in an overly positive light, especially if they are critiqued for saying such things. And if the participant reads the final publication and can identify themselves, as is often the case, it may leave them feeling ashamed and resentful. This is not to say that researchers should sanitize the data and remove any controversial statements, quite the opposite. Qualitative research should be an emancipatory practice for marginalized individuals. Using participant quotes or experiences can spark social change by demonstrating the way stigma and systemic violence manifest in the world. When faced with discriminatory remarks, the researcher is forced into a balancing act. They have a duty to include some of these ostracizing statements without denigrating the participant, but to also exclude more extreme comments in order to keep them secret and protect the participant's character. Radical feminists Celia Kitzinger and Sue Wilkinson describe their experience with this balancing act. They detail their sense of conflict whilst doing research on women's experiences with breast cancer and sexual harassment, and coming up against women who expressed feminist values that were not only different from their own, but were entirely contradictory. They were reluctant to validate the ways these women framed their experiences because they saw them as problematic and counterproductive to the radical feminist research project, political project. However, they also did not want to erase their participants' voices or present these women as blind victims of cis heteropatriarchy who needed to be emancipated from their false consciousness by an outsider. The first time I performed this balancing act was at the end of my doctoral project. My study focused on the way gay and queer men use certain health-related practices to pursue well-being. One of my participants, Henry, was particularly keen to share his experiences with me and to voice his concerns about the norms around sex and intimacy that he saw in the gay community. The interview went fantastic. We built a wonderful rapport quite early on. The tone was conversational, and we went through a number of knotty topics related to his experience of substance use, sex, and his relationship to the gay community. After I passed my oral defense and was making my final amendments, I sent my thesis to all the participants who had asked to read a copy and invited them to give feedback at this final stage. Henry was the only one who responded to my invitation, and he did so with enthusiasm. He emailed me a very thorough list of feedback and annotated the entire thesis with comments, thoughts, reflections on what he thought about it. As I read through his notes, it became quickly evident that our values were at odds. And I struggled to take many of his comments seriously because not only did they go against the spirit and message of the thesis, but some of them were overtly discriminatory and problematic. I found myself in an ethical quandary, holding a bundle of complicated emotions. It was my responsibility to seriously consider Henry's comments, as I had explicitly asked him to provide them to me, and he had spent a lot of time considering them and providing them, but I also disagreed with almost all of them. Moreover, if I was to incorporate his changes, I would have had to rehaul the entire thesis, which was impossible at this late stage. This uncomfortable tension made me consider whether my ignoring of Henry's comments constituted as a form of political censorship, and prompted me to critically examine my personal and professional boundaries with participants. After I spoke with my supervisors, I resolved the matter by emailing Henry, thanking him for his participation, his feedback, and incorporating the most constructive of his comments. People keep secrets for a reason. This might be due to stigma or shame, or they might be afraid of what might happen if a secret is set loose into the world. Ensuring the participant is aware of their right to anonymity and confidentiality is standard procedure during the enrolment process. These protective protocols help to assure the participant that the interview will be a safe space where they can say anything without fear of repercussion, unless it initiates mandatory reporting, such as a serious threat to harm others or themselves. Their secrets will not cross the threshold of the interview room, which can be a deeply cathartic experience. Christopher Poulos limns this dynamic of holding and unloading secrets in his book on ethnography and family secrets. He details the hope that can come with unearthing what has been buried. He says, in communication, as flawed and messy and misguided as it can be, I find a shimmering thread of hope. I, to achieve my full humanness, must find my voice to penetrate the dark shroud of secrecy. But how might this disclosure affect the researcher? A great deal has been written about the emotional labor and vicarious trauma that accompany research in difficult issues like grief, suicide, terminal illness, and sexual violence. Too much of this work without adequate support and self-care can lead a researcher to burnout and emotional neuralgia. While an interview may not feel overwhelming or confronting, some secrets can leave you, the researcher, feeling helpless and unable to offer any meaningful support to the participant. I had such an experience with Sophia, a woman I was interviewing about her experiences with substance dependency treatment. The interview had gone over the hour. We had lost track of time from being so engrossed in the conversation. Sophia candidly spoke about her experience with drug addiction, various attempts to get clean over the years, and the role her husband played in all of this. She described how her husband had forced her into treatment under threat of divorce and financial hardship, and the way that he emotionally manipulated her and engaged in coercive and controlling behaviours, such as electronically tracking her movements. Their marriage was a volatile one, which she had almost left a few times, but had ultimately decided to stay. I don't want to be seen as a victim or disempowered, she assured me. This is a choice I've made for myself. The interview left me feeling vexed and somewhat concerned for her well-being. It was upsetting to hear how her husband's actions had impacted her mental health, and the ways he manipulated her. Yet despite recognizing the abusive dynamics of her marriage, Sophia felt empowered by her decision to stay. I wanted to help, to find an escape for her, but I could not. To encourage Sophia to leave the marriage was not only a transgression of personal and professional boundaries, it was also explicitly against her wishes. In the dull silence after the interview, I realized that my desire to emancipate Sophia from this marriage was more about clearing my own conscience than it was about helping my participant. I had been made aware of a harmful situation and felt it my duty as a researcher and compassionate person to remedy it as a way of caring for my participant, but this remedy was not to be found. The emotional impact of hearing certain secrets and disclosures of sensitive information can be heightened for insider researchers. The insider-outside binary has been challenged extensively by scholars. Who decides that you're an insider? How long do you have to identify with the community to become an insider? What if you're not enough of an insider for a participant? Many have also discussed the personal risks and ethical complications that can come with doing insider research. Working closely with other community members can prompt questions around community belongingness and personal identity. Being an insider researcher can provoke internal conflicts around personal roles and responsibilities within the community. When should I act as a community member and when as a researcher? It can also permanently alter the way the researcher views and relates to their kin. Researchers often encourage qualitative researchers to embrace the ambiguous boundaries here and use these uncertain spaces of researcher-participant relationality to delve deeper into the field and the data. The emotional risks are also heightened for early career researchers. This cohort often feel a greater pressure to quickly gather a wealth of high caliber publications and research projects, and to fast develop a wide range of network people in the industry. This pressure is driven by job precarity, institutions binding performance indicators with employee worth, and the imperative for academics to maximize their research output in order to meet the demands of the neoliberal corporatized university. As a result, early career researchers may feel compelled to finish projects that are ultimately deleterious to their mental health or feel unable to ask for adequate support lest they lose future jobs opportunities. I had an interview with a man named John. He had opted to have the interview in a car in a parking lot because he was quite concerned about anonymity. He had even refused to give me any of his contact details out of fear of having his identity exposed. I was interviewing him about his kink practices, sexual identity, and relationship to the gay community. He spoke about what it was like growing up in the 60s and 70s, a time when queer people were considered criminals and mentally ill, and how he had put his queer desires aside to marry a woman. 40 years later, he was still with his wife and had 2 children whom he loved dearly. He described how his desire for other men never dissipated, and through clandestine sexual encounters, he found a way to fulfill his queer desires without his wife knowing. He spoke about the regret of not taking a different path in life, one where he had been able to express his gay identity, and said quite candidly, had I have had my time over, I would be gay. Being the first person to hear this, and as a queer man, this interview hit hard. A nerve had been exposed. I had personal experiences with aspects of his story, and this added to the raw emotional impact. John had felt comfortable unloading these secrets onto me by virtue of the fact that I was an insider, and the knowledge that he would never ever see me again, which was a great benefit for a researcher, but it had an unexpectedly heavy emotional toll. Some interviews haunt us after we finish them. Like secrets, they can linger in the pit of our stomach or the back of our mind. The research takes on a psychic life of its own. Drawing from Avery Gordon's book on haunting and sociological imagination, Sarah Wilson demonstrates how the effective nature of qualitative data and subsequent publications can seed with emotional potency that can provoke the reader into transformative social action. Interviews can do the same thing for researchers. The emotional residue from certain interviews, along with the secrets and difficult experiences they hold, become ghosts that follow us. Andrew Herman describes the ghosts, vampires, and zombies that an autoethnographer encounters when moving through the archives of memory. These supernatural beings are the unresolved connections we have with the people whom we once loved or forged a deep connection with, the painful memories that refuse to stay buried or put away, the difficult emotions that stick to us like a leech. These undead beings demonstrate how the past not only co-constructs the future in the present, it has a profound impact on the way that we understand ourselves and others. Coaxing ghosts into the light of day can be a way of exercising them in order to facilitate emotional healing and disarm the venom of trauma and shame. What happens when a participant asks you, the researcher, to disclose a secret? Some have argued that it is impossible to have a truly balanced set of power relations in a qualitative research setting, which I'll touch on later. Part of this power imbalance comes from the nature of interviewing and the way that participants share a large amount of very personal information, and the researcher gives none back. It's very, very one-sided. For some, this is the reason why they felt comfortable inviting us into some of their more intimate parts of their life, knowing that they're talking to a stranger and it was going to be one-sided. Feminist researchers stress how genuine rapport building does involve mutual disclosure, but over-familiarity can create a blurring of the relationship and muddy the waters of the intimacy that's occurring. In this way, rapport building can be considered a type of emotional edge work, where the researcher is tasked with sharing enough information about themselves to establish trust, but also keeping sufficient distance to not mislead the participant into believing the relationship is any more than professional. So how does the researcher decide what to disclose, and to which participants? When a participant asks you to share something about yourself after they've shared all their secrets, what do you do? As a drug use researcher, participants are often interested to know about my own history with drugs after the interview is finished. This curiosity can range from, have you ever used drugs before, to have you ever been addicted to drugs? I recently completed a set of interviews with people who use methamphetamine, and one day I was asked by two separate participants if I had ever used drugs, this drug or drugs more broadly. In both instances, I felt conflicted and unsure about what to do. It had been easy to build a friendly rapport with these participants, and they'd been very open with their experiences of substance dependency. So it only seemed fair that I should give them a substantial answer. But it also felt like a breach of personal and professional boundaries to give the participant an overview of my drug history. I decided to take the safer option for the first participant, and I gave him a vague answer about how I had tried drugs, nothing too hardcore, when I was younger. He accepted my answer and didn't press me any further, but I heard a note of disappointment in his voice. We said goodbye, and I felt a niggling sense of betrayal. While I had not tried meth before, I do have experience with problematic substance use and dependency. Perhaps he had dowsed out this somehow in the interview and could tell he was speaking with someone who had lived experience. Or maybe he just wanted to legitimate our emotional connection by knowing that I could relate to parts of his story. I took a different approach to the second participant who asked me the same question. And I told her that while I hadn't tried meth, I did have experience with substance dependency. She sallied out this sigh of relief, and I could feel her body relax through the phone. While I had felt uncomfortable disclosing this piece of information, it changed the tone and the meaning of the interview for her. She felt far more secure knowing that this information was with me, someone who had this similar experience, and that I was going to be the one sharing it with the world. My experience with these two participants highlights how researchers disclosing secret or sensitive parts of themselves can be a form of care when working with certain groups. It creates a deeper sense of trust and connection and intimacy, and allows the participant to feel more secure about how their data is going to be treated. It can also help to balance the set of power relations, not only because of the reciprocity, but because researchers showing vulnerability humanizes them and establishes kinship. It can also be incredibly dangerous for researchers. Magdalena Harris describes the emotional risks that come with disclosing too much to participants, particularly when it comes to drug use and chronic illness. Spilling out too much information to a participant can leave the researcher feeling overly vulnerable, reopen old wounds, and warm up substance cravings. She highlights how our bodies can disclose secrets against our will. The effective energy or emotional charge of an interview can reveal the true feelings of a researcher, such as discomfort, irritability, or fatigue. And scars, needle track marks, tattoos, piercings can immediately tell their own story. Silence in an interview can often feel like a sign of failure. You haven't worked hard enough to establish rapport, your questions were poorly worded or irrelevant, you fumble your questions and look like a fool. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. Rather, these quiet moments can be really important pieces of data. Silence is frequently used to plaster away secrets and scandals, so a lacuna in a story can reveal more than the participant would ever say. A participant's silence can indicate their sense of shame about something and refusal to speak it into being. It can also be a symptom of alexithymia, the inability to put words to an experience. Or perhaps the participant just feels it isn't worth talking about. It's also sometimes the researcher's role to be silent when a participant is talking about a really intense period of their life as a mark of respect and honouring what they've been through. Furthermore, participants withholding information and remaining silent can be a way of them expressing power and reinscribing their sense of agency by refusing to bend to the wills of the researcher. Jack Halberstam talks about how refusal can lead to a radical emancipation because it creates dissonance and disorder. I recently discovered the benefits of playing with silence in an interview and how fruitful it can be. Silent probing involves remaining silent after a participant has answered a question, which often prompts them to elaborate further, divulge more information they may not have otherwise, and makes them question how much the researcher actually knows. As qualitative researchers, we're taught a range of interview techniques designed to yield rich data, such as using open-ended questions, developing rapport, having emotional sensitivity. These interviewing techniques are arguably forms of manipulation. We are finding ways of engaging the participant in such a way that they lower their defenses, so we may obtain certain pieces of desirous information. Carolyn Clark talks about the first time she did a life history interview with a participant who told her story about a personal violation that was particularly graphic in detail. Clark says, "I believe she confided in me without thinking. That, in a real sense, it was a result of finding herself being listened to by a stranger who was truly interested, who expressed care and concern, who wasn't judging her. She was seduced by the caring interview, and I was the unwitting seducer." I had a similar experience with a participant who, after the interview had finished, remarked on how easy it had been to open up about his life, particularly his HIV status. Shortly after saying this, he quickly turned to me with a look of panic and said that I couldn't connect his HIV status with his workplace in the final write-up. I assured him that no identifying information would be included, but to assure him, I said that I will make up a fake participant and load all of his HIV-related experiences onto that one, so there's no possibility that they would be connected. I too had become an unwitting seducer. The issues raised thus far around researchers and participants disclosing secrets or refusing to, the ethics of interviewing techniques, emotional safety, researcher positionality are underpinned by three core concepts: power, care, and consent. Some have argued that researchers are always the main beneficiaries of the inherent power imbalance in research. Researchers promote a curated version of the project to efficiently attract a high number of potential participants. They engage in rapport building tactics and a range of interviewing techniques to elicit more personal experiences. And they have final say over how a participant and their story are portrayed in final publications. Further evidence of this power imbalance can be seen in the disproportionate benefits the researcher receives compared to the participant. Using the participants' experiences, the researcher is able to write publications which will further their career, enhance the prestige of their institution, while the participant only receives a small sum of money, if at all. We may wax lyrical about the less tangible benefits someone may receive from participating in the study, like having the sense they're creating a better world for the marginalized and silenced, improving the well-being of their community, or gaining a sense of purpose and catharsis through telling their story. And indeed, these are important and legitimate benefits, but they don't compare to the social and financial capital that a researcher receives from the same research, such as promotions, professional accolades, and the expedited upward social mobility. This is not to say that qualitative research is irredeemably problematic. My argument is that the true extent of this inherent power imbalance must be openly acknowledged and not papered over with thin claims of equality. And from here, more nuanced attempts to address it across the lifespan of a research project can be developed. It is not common practice to check in with a participant after an interview to see how they are feeling. Participants are typically given a list of support services at some point prior to the interview commencing, just in case the conversation leaves them feeling vulnerable. But the assumption is that the interview itself is the main risk factor. What about the questions posed to potential participants during the screening process? Researchers need to ensure that participants possess the relevant lived experience when recruiting for a study. To do this, they're asked a list of questions by a team member to confirm that they meet the study criteria. If the study focuses on sensitive topics like substance dependency or sexual violence, there'll be some screening questions related to these issues. And participants will be prompted to provide some vague details about them. How frequently have you used substance X in the past 6 months? Were you exposed to sexual abuse before the age of X? Have you experienced any of the following forms of sexual harassment? The answers to these questions can graze up against secret traumas and emotional bruises or drag up difficult feelings, as was the case with Mark, one of my more recent research participants. He beamed at me through the laptop screen and he was ecstatic to be part of this research project. He began to tell me about his day and why he reached out to me and highlighted how meaningful it was to be able to share his experience of substance dependency with me and know that it was going to help the lives of others. After speaking for a few minutes, he coyly remarked that one of the screening questions related to recent substance use patterns had roused a wave of cravings, which had been difficult to subdue. Mark had managed to stay successfully abstinent for several weeks, but being asked to disclose his recent usage revived a host of memories and accompanying cravings. I had never considered that this screening question could potentially set off a person's cravings, and it was upsetting to hear that I'd inadvertently done this to Mark. He cheerfully assured me that he had been fine, that he had managed, albeit with some difficulty, but it still left me with a deep sense of discomfort about this unforeseen safety risk. It also made me consider how many other participants had gone through the same thing. The screening process is rarely, if ever, seen as a safety concern that needs to be addressed. However, Mark's experience demonstrates otherwise. So what is our duty of care to participants in this context, and what are the implications in regards to consent? Consent is often brief and punctiliar. The participant is given all the necessary information about the study, signs the consent form, then the research is carried out. Consent is objectified and is obtained by the researcher. Participants must be cautioned during the consent process that the interview is going to touch on some sensitive topics, but without truly knowing what's actually going to happen in the interview, it's difficult to adequately emotionally prepare. Participants are told that they are free to withdraw their consent at any stage of the project, but there can be many reasons why someone does not revoke their consent despite wanting to. They may have lost the researcher's contact details or feel too intimidated or guilty to ask for their data to be removed. The fake friendship developed in the recruitment and interview process can also make them feel like they'll be betraying their friend, which may be particularly true for participants who are socially isolated or lonely. We as qualitative researchers do engage in some ongoing consent practices. When a participant becomes visibly upset during an interview, we pause, we ask how they're doing and check if they want to continue. If they ask for a piece of information to be redacted, we oblige. When a participant remains silent and refuses to answer a question, they're tacitly yet clearly saying that they don't consent to this piece of information being given out. There's also the sense that it's our role to serve the participant in some way. They have invited us into their life, the empathic listener into their world, and it's our duty to obligingly follow them. They're sharing their life experiences and secrets with us so that we may use them for our own benefit. The least we can do is listen to them. The researcher, however, is rarely considered party to this consent process. It's assumed that they silently provide total consent the moment they step into a project. We can emotionally prepare for an interview by arming ourselves with an interview schedule and a solid idea of the topics and questions that we're going to ask, but we can also flounder if the conversation veers into unexpected territory pocked with emotional landmines. We're seldom told that we can end an interview if it becomes too difficult, because this would be tantamount to throwing out an entire set of data, which is particularly problematic if it's a hard to reach group. The issue of consent extends to the transcription secondary data analysis process too. Transcribers have been identified as a vulnerable group because not only are they separated from the research project and therefore have no context for what they're listening to, they're given detailed accounts of trauma and difficult experiences that they have to repeatedly listen to without the support that researchers are given through their institution, and confidentiality prevents them from debriefing with their colleagues. While transcribers can and should be advised ahead of time that a recording contains vivid first-hand accounts of trauma, it can have a cumulative effect on them. And if they decide to not continue, if they withdraw their consent, they lose their income from this, and it might damage the relationship they have with that research team and prevent any future work coming their way out of fear of sensitivity issues. The coding process and continual rereading of transcripts can have a similar impact on the researcher. So neither the researcher nor the transcriber are advised that they have the option to withdraw or change their level of consent at the later stage of this project. Researchers, if they do decide to withdraw or change their consent, have a little bit more wriggle room compared to a transcriber. Another researcher can step in and take over the coding process, or they can take a step back and work on other aspects of the project. But this is not always possible if it's a sole researcher or the project is time sensitive, like a PhD study. Taking all of this into consideration, it's constructive to reimagine interviews as intimate encounters, not unlike sex. The researcher and participant are in a private and emotionally vulnerable setting where the upholding of trust and safety is paramount. Discussions on sexual consent emphasize the need for open and ongoing dialogue, enthusiastic consent from both parties. So why would this not also apply in a research setting? Implementing an ethics of sexual consent in a research context provides a map for researcher-participant care too. Researchers should be encouraged by institutions to thoughtfully examine how the research might impact them and to consider their level of consent at each stage of the project. If consent is beginning to wane, the researchers should reflect on whether they want to continue, and if they do, what supports they need in order to reaffirm their consent. In terms of participant care, normalising check-ins at each stage of the research project has the potential to create meaningful change. Advising a potential participant that they will be asked about their recent drug use during the screening process will enable them to emotionally prepare. Offering support to them afterwards, regardless if they're qualified or not, will also prevent situations like marks from being replicated. There's also great benefit to contacting interviewees a week or so after the interaction via text message or email. Approaching the participant in this way can encourage a greater response as it's less confrontational than calling. And reaching out to them after the interview not only signals to them that you do actually care and you do take their safety and contribution to the study seriously, but it can also function as an important point of intervention in some situations. A simple text message asking, "Are you okay?" can have a significant impact on a participant struggling with substance cravings or poor mental health, and doesn't feel able to reach out to their healthcare team or support network if they have one. Secrets hold enormous sway over us. They can provoke us to do uncomfortable things and bend us out of shape. Releasing a secret can feel liberating as well as terrifying. To hold a secret might be to hold a great deal of power or be broken by an impossible burden. Secrets also have a fundamental relationship to qualitative research that's characterized by ambiguity, contradictions, and a substantial amount of ethical considerations and concerns. Interviews provide a unique opportunity for participants to purge their secrets in safety and know their veiled words will help to improve the lives of others. Alternatively, participants can reclaim their sense of agency by refusing to divulge certain secrets to a researcher. Secrets often dwell in tender spots, so sharing them with a researcher may bring about spasms of pain and hurt. This can be a cathartic experience for some, whereas others might find it deepens the wound. Participants can also be subtly coerced into spilling their secrets in an interview and feel unable to seek remedy to the situation. Trucking with secrets is riskier for researchers. There are substantial emotional costs involved in repeatedly listening to buried traumas of participants, particularly if they are telling this story for the first time to an insider researcher, and being asked to reveal your own secrets in an interview can create an ethical dilemma. Researchers who are particularly adept at rapport building and interviewing techniques will find it easier to elicit more detailed information from a participant, which raises serious concerns around participant consent and whether coercion has taken place. Conversely, researchers are also faced with the problem of consent when dealing with participants who find it exceptionally easy to describe confronting experiences. These distressing accounts can complicate the data analysis process and represent an emotional risk for researchers and third-party transcribers. To discuss secrets in qualitative research is to discuss how researchers and participants can and should care for each other, particularly in regard to personal and emotional boundaries. It is through secrets in all their messy glory that qualitative research becomes meaningful. Thank you. Oh, you're on
mute. That was amazing, Simon. Thank you so much. I see some applause from some people. Are you still screen sharing or is it my dodgy? Can you stop sharing screen?
Oh, there we go.
There we are. Okay, excellent. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so what I've learned recently at a conference is that I hate asking questions, but as chair, I get to do it and I get to ask all those questions that I think I wouldn't normally ask, but I do see that Isabel's got a question, so I'm gonna let Isabel go first.
Hi, I was curious that you were talking about those two participants. The first one, you decided to disclose some of your own experience. And then the first one you decided not to, the second one you decided to disclose. Is there sort of a rule of thumb that you've followed since then, or is it very much trying to figure out what that person might find helpful?
Yeah, it was partly that. It was also the same dynamic that happens with participants. I'm never going to speak to this person again. I'm never going to see them again. The closest contact I'm going to have is sending like a journal article to them. So in that way, I felt secure in telling them because it felt like there were going to be no repercussions. And indeed, there are no repercussions, except I guess for now when I'm laying it out. But yeah, my approach since has been to take each situation, each interview by itself and decide how comfortable I am disclosing information to the participant based on what we've spoken about, what they've shared, the sense of intimacy, I guess, that developed between us. And I guess through that, it is a sense of trust. Yeah.
Denton, I'm going to call on you in a moment, but I just want to read this out from Priya because it's so lovely. So not a question, but just a big thanks for a really interesting, thoughtful, and open presentation. A number of ideas and issues raised resonated with some of my own research experiences and helped to clarify some of my thinking about future work. Personally, as a qualitative researcher, I can say that there was a lot of resonation for me as well. So I suspect for a lot of people on the call, on the seminar. Denton, did you want to go? If so, you're on mute, Denton. Shall we pop over to APSU? Or is Denton joining us?
Sorry, I hadn't changed my name on my screen.
I don't know your name.
Oh yeah, I'm Amelia. I'm from APSU. We're the Association of Participating Service Users. I've previously worked as a peer researcher, and in the introduction of myself to people that we were actually conducting interviews with, we actually had a little spiel sort of saying that, you know, I am a person with lived experience. And then a lot of people actually sort of responded to that in a really positive way, saying, oh, you know, that does make me feel really safe. You know, it's great. It's really empowering seeing that other peers are out there doing research. So I found it to be a positive experience. I think where it does become challenging is that the ethics of disclosure, definitely, and sort of making sure that your disclosures are purposeful and what the intent is and the boundaries as to what you're actually saying. Because I mean, once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah.
You can't get that back. But yeah, I've had that experience and had to weigh up sort of how much am I willing to disclose, and it's always come back to the intent.
Yeah, and just the response that I got from the second person really made me realize that it can be an act of care for the participant. Just as they're sharing all these experiences with me, it's an act of care to other people in their community. And so, like, as an insider, whatever that means, it also becomes an act of care to the participant on that level, if that makes sense.
We have a question from Joseph Wong. Simon, is there a possibility of getting a PDF copy of the presentation? And also on that, I'm going to add, are you publishing this?
I am publishing this. So I'm going to be sending off a slightly altered version of what I just read out today, and hopefully have it published soon.
Wonderful. And can people reach out to you for those slides in the meantime? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Is my email address on the event?
I have no idea, but I can pop it in the chat now.
Yeah.
I have a question. I have a few questions, but one of my questions is, so I was at a conference recently at UNSW, and I was in a workshop about peer research, and you talked about, and I forget who you were talking about, but it's like, you know, you share this information, or they share, and the participant shares information, and they go away, and you never see them again. But in peer research, can there be concerns around confidentiality and perhaps within that, you know, that community?
Yeah, I've certainly come across this. And I guess this is another risk of insider research. When I was doing my PhD, I was house sharing, and I came out of my room, and one of my participants was hanging out with one of my housemates, and that really took me by surprise, and didn't really know what to do. I obviously didn't say anything, but my housemate said, oh, how do you two know each other? And we both kind of looked at each other, unsure of what to say. And particularly in drug use research, like a lot of peer support workers often engage in this research. And so you do have a lot of partly hidden relationships going on, which can, I don't know, make for interesting tensions. And yeah, did that answer the question?
Thank you. I wanted to ask you one other question, and I suspect some other people may be thinking it, but in thinking about power and the way that research academia works, and that, and you talked about, we publish and we do all these things and then our career gets benefited, but then, people who participate get a few bucks maybe if they get remunerated. But what are your thoughts on different dissemination strategies, so that it's not just like, have you thought about how you can feed back to the community?
Like, I think that's a fantastic way of attempting to balance it out a little bit more. And I think that's one of the things I really like about working at NDARC, is because we work with a lot of clinicians directly. This research is going straight to practice in some way, shape or form, rather than writing articles that will go to a journal that is behind a paywall that only people within academia or adjacent to academia will read. And so being able to give research directly to the people that have been involved, to the communities that have been consulted, I think is a wonderful way of creating a little bit more balance, because it does, like, as I mentioned, like, research does have the potential to change the world. And I think that's one of the most magical things about theory, is you read this stuff, these new ideas, it can change your relationship to the world, how you see people, how you engage people, how you see yourself. It can radically transform you, and that's fantastic. So if we can do that as researchers for others, if we can find ways of circumventing all the paywalls that the institution in all its forms put up, like, I think that's our duty of care for these people. Because yeah, like, we're winning in this relationship, so we could try to offer as much as we can to the other person or other group.
Excellent, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it Ivapine?
Thanks for trying, Lisa. It's Eva Pennell, coming to you from Ngunnawal country. Simon, that was an incredible presentation. Thank you so much. I was just, that was like thinking about if you've had an opportunity to do research with multicultural people and what sort of, like, their interpretation of what we talked about today about disclosure and like confidentiality and all that sort of, all the things you articulated today. Has there been any difference in that space?
Yeah, and I think this is why I homed in or specified that this was qualitative research related to health, because there's a totally different set of issues going on with multicultural groups. Like, in terms of consent, like, there's a lot of stuff about how researchers need to consult and engage with communities, such as Indigenous communities, and to have a lot of dialogue with them before starting research with them. Find out what their needs are, find out what their boundaries are, find out what this research is going to do for them, what they're going to get out of the research, what they want the research to look like in order to proceed. So there certainly is a different set of considerations that goes on. I personally haven't done a lot of that research purely because my work focuses on drug use. We do try and aim for a diverse group of people, but I don't know, we tend to get majority white samples, which it can be hard to find a representative or a diverse group of people, particularly when you're looking for people who have used certain drug within a certain period of time. And I know we try different recruitment strategies and like go to different places that have, like ACON, for example, like we approach them to try and find queer people to be involved in research, but it can be quite difficult in some situations. But yeah, there's certainly a lot more room for this to delve into how this would apply to non-white folks, to Indigenous folks in different countries even, which have different systems. Yeah, and I think it'd be really interesting to see what that looks like.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I just want to acknowledge, and I'm going to preface this with, I now feel like my own consent thing as facilitator here. Roderick Smith has left something in the chat about, and I don't want to minimize what happened by even saying it was difficult, because I feel like that minimizes what you've shared in there, but a really tricky experience that happened, which, yeah. So I invite you to chat, Roderick.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the comment now.
Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, it was just a difficult one. I'm part of the method program with ACON, and I'm one of the peers for sexualized drug use. And usually it's quite sort of simplistic, but this was a very complex client that we didn't realize how complex it was going to be.
Mm.
And as mentioned in the chat, after the second session, I had to take him through breathing exercises, and then a week later he passed. So I was left with all these, what if I said something differently? But I know through my reflection with my supervisor, I did everything by the book, and we got him counseling. But you're still left with this, I don't know, this vacuum of emotions as a peer worker. So yeah, just is a process that I'm working through at the moment. I'd mention it, you know, yeah, because it's quite relevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I had a similar interaction with one of my participants. The interview was really rough. He was very, very laconic, very stony, didn't give much answers. And towards the end of the interview, I was thinking, why on earth has this man agreed to do this? Like, and he wasn't receiving any money for it either. But he was talking about how he had been HIV positive for a number of years, and he had stopped and started some medications. And as a result, when he started them again, they had a pretty big impact on his kidney and liver health, liver function. So he had to stop them. And he was on all these other drugs, and they were making his life miserable. He said that like he just couldn't function. And so he decided to stop all treatment. And against medical advice, the doctor said, you've got 2 years max to live. At the time, I think it had been 3 years or more. But he said, I'm waiting to die. So I'm trying to do what I can to like leave my mark on the world. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm now part of this. I'm like one of the, and he was so socially isolated as well. And so like, it was a really tough interview. And I guess he's another one of those ghosts that follows me when I'm doing work.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing all of that. I think we think qualitative research can be so wonderful and so great, but there is that emotional weight that comes with it that can be so tough, and it sticks. Yeah, so thank you so much for your reflections today, Simon, on how we navigate and manage that, and how we protect ourselves whilst we protect participants.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, it was wonderful. All right, everyone have a lovely rest of your afternoon and enjoy the sunshine in Sydney if you're here. Thank you.